Tiny black twins beg Mountain Man for help. He instantly bursts into tears. The wind rolled down the mountains in long, slow breaths, carrying the smell of pine and cold stone. Snow still clung to the edges of the narrow trail, even though spring had already claimed the valley below. Up here, time moved differently. Quieter, colder. Eli Turner adjusted the strap of his pack and kept walking. His boots sank into damp earth with each step, leaving heavy prints behind him. The forest was his only company, tall, dark pines standing in perfect stillness, their needles whispering when the wind found them. For 12 years, it had been enough. He rounded a bend and stopped. Not because of the view, though the ridge opened wide to a sky washed in pale grey, but because of the sound. It was faint, broken, like something between a sob and a shiver. Eli frowned. Up here in this forgotten stretch of the range, no one came without a reason. He stepped off the trail, boots brushing through patches of brittle grass. The sound came again, 2 of them now, overlapping, uneven, and then he saw them. They were sitting in the hollow of an old cedar, the trunk wide enough to shield them from the wind. 2 children, small, thin, dark skin dulled by dirt and cold. They wore mismatched clothes, the kind you'd find in the bottom of a church donation bin, and no coats. The older one, a boy, maybe 6, had his arm around the smaller girl. Her head rested against his shoulder, eyes glassy, lips cracked. They both looked at him the way a wild animal looks at a trap, part fear, part desperate hope. Eli took 1 step closer, then froze. There was something in their eyes he hadn't seen in years, a kind of knowing that children should never carry. He felt it like a stone dropped into his chest. The boy's mouth moved, but no sound came. Then, finally, in a voice rough with cold, "Please, help." It was only 2 words, but they carried the weight of 100 stories. Eli's throat tightened. The world behind him, the cabin, the fire, the safety, felt impossibly far away now, and in front of him were 2 small lives, teetering on the edge of something dark. The mountain was silent, except for their breathing. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, catching on the girl's tangled hair. Eli Turner, a man who hadn't cried in over a decade, felt the sting rise behind his eyes before he could stop it. And in that quiet he understood. Whatever had brought these children here was worse than anything waiting for him on the trail ahead. Eli crouched slowly, his knees popping in the cold air. The boy's arm tightened around the girl, pulling her closer like he expected Eli to snatch her away. Up close, he could see how small they really were. Wrists no thicker than twigs, cheeks hollowed in a way no child's should be. The girl's eyes fluttered, half-lidded, but she didn't speak. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Eli's gut clenched. He'd seen breathing like that before, back when he'd worked in the mines. Men trapped too long in the cold air, lungs slowing down. Sometimes you saved them, sometimes you didn't. He rubbed his hands over his face, trying to think. They didn't look lost. They looked discarded, like someone had put them here on purpose and walked away. "You alone out here?" he asked quietly, though the answer sat in front of him. The boy gave a tiny nod, then lowered his eyes. No mention of parents, no pointing to a cabin down the slope. Something shifted in Eli's chest, a pull, deep and old. It had been years since he'd thought of her. His sister, Lila, small, just like this girl, standing barefoot on the porch the day their father left for good, clutching Eli's hand so tight her fingernails left little half-moon marks in his skin. No one had come for them that day. No one had asked if they'd eaten. They'd just survived. Eli shook his head hard, as if it could shake the memory loose. That was another lifetime. This wasn't his business. He stood, scanning the tree line. The smart thing would be to leave them here. Go find someone in the nearest town who could handle it. People trained for this sort of thing. Not a man who'd built a life out of staying invisible. But the trail to town was 2 days down the mountain, and the cold was sinking in fast. If he left them, they wouldn't make it till morning. He knew that the way you know when the weather's about to turn, not from charts or signs, but from the ache in your bones. The boy spoke again, voice barely a thread. "She's my sister," like he needed Eli to know that. Like that was the one piece of truth he could still say out loud. Eli stared at the little arm wrapped around the girl's shoulders, trembling from exhaustion, but still holding on. Something broke inside him then, not loud, not shattering, just a quiet fracture that spread like frost across glass. He took a deep breath, felt the cold burn his lungs. There was no choice here. Not really. "All right," he said finally, voice low, steady. "We're going." The boy's eyes lifted, just enough for Eli to see the flicker of relief in them. He slid his pack off his shoulder, dug out the wool blanket and wrapped it around the girl first, tucking it tight under her chin. Then he held out his hand to the boy. For a second the child didn't move. Then, slowly, he took it. His fingers were ice cold. Eli squeezed once, not for comfort, but for promise. They weren't alone anymore. They moved slow at first, the boy holding his sister's weight as Eli cleared the narrow path ahead. The air felt heavier now, like the mountain itself was listening. Eli kept glancing over his shoulder, not just for wild animals, for people. 2 miles down the ridge, they stopped in a sheltered clearing. Eli knelt beside the boy, unwrapping a strip of jerky and handing it to him. The girl was too weak to chew, so Eli softened a piece in his canteen water, feeding it to her in small bites. It was only when her breathing eased that Eli finally asked, "Who put you up here?" The boy's eyes darted away. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the tree line, the way someone might look toward a locked door they're afraid will open. "They'll come back," he whispered. Eli's jaw tightened. "Who?" The boy's lips pressed together like he'd already said too much. But the girl stirred then, murmuring something faint. Eli leaned closer, catching just enough to freeze his blood. "Don't let Daddy find us." The words landed hard, heavier than the cold. Eli sat back, his mind pulling images he didn't want. A man's shadow on a cabin wall, a voice raised in anger, small feet trying to run before the door slammed shut. He'd known men like that in the mines, men who hid their cruelty in plain sight until it spilled over and someone ended up in the dirt. "Why would he leave you here?" Eli asked, his voice low. The boy's gaze lifted, and for the first time, there was something sharper than fear in it. "He didn't. We ran." The wind shifted then, carrying with it the faintest echo, the snap of a branch somewhere far below, a sound too deliberate to be the forest. Eli stood, scanning the slope. "You're saying he's looking for you?" The boy nodded once. "Not just him. His friends. They got guns, and they said—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "They said we belong to them now." Eli felt his stomach knot. This wasn't just a bad father. This was something worse. A man who could gather others to his cause, who believed these children were his to claim. A sudden memory flashed. Eli at 15, shoving his sister into a neighbor's barn, whispering for her not to come out until dark because their father was drunk again and carrying the rifle. The same fear, the same urgency. Somewhere in the valley below, a crow cawed once, twice, then fell silent. The forest stilled. "They know these mountains?" Eli asked. The boy's silence was all the answer he needed. Time was closing in. The trail to Eli's cabin cut through open ground. Anyone following would see them, but staying here meant being hunted in the dark. Eli looked at the twins, the girl's head limp against her brother's shoulder, the boy's thin chest rising fast with each breath, and knew there wasn't a safe choice. "All right," he said, voice hard now. "We move fast, and we don't stop till we're inside." He shouldered his pack, lifting the girl into his arms. The boy followed close, eyes darting at every sound. Somewhere down the mountain, a man was coming, and Eli knew from the way the wind shifted that he wasn't coming alone. By the time they reached the cabin, the light was thinning into that deep blue that comes before night. Eli pushed the door open with his shoulder, carrying the girl inside while the boy followed close, still scanning behind them like prey that knows the wolf is near. The cabin was simple. One room, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with jars of dried beans and coffee grounds. It smelled faintly of cedar smoke and leather. Eli set the girl down on his cot, tucking the blanket around her again. He moved to the hearth, striking a match and coaxing the small fire back to life. The warmth spread slowly, turning the frost on the window into tiny rivers. The boy stood in the doorway, stiff and uncertain. Eli nodded toward the wooden stool. "Sit." It wasn't a request, but it wasn't harsh either. While the fire caught, Eli pulled out a pot, filling it with water from the barrel. He set it over the flames, dropped in strips of venison, wild onion, a pinch of salt. The smell began to fill the room. The boy's shoulders lowered, just slightly. When the stew was ready, Eli handed the first bowl to him. The boy hesitated, eyes flicking to Eli's, as if expecting something in return. Eli only nodded toward the spoon. Eat. They didn't speak while they ate. Only the sound of spoons against tin bowls, the soft crackle of the fire. But something shifted in the silence, the kind of quiet that doesn't keep people apart, but draws them closer. After the girl was sleeping, Eli stepped outside to the small shed. When he returned, he carried an old .22 rifle, its wood stock worn smooth with age. He set it on the table. The boy's eyes widened. "You know how to hold one?" Eli asked. The boy shook his head. Eli motioned him over, placing the rifle gently in his hands. "First thing," Eli said, voice low, "you never point it at something you don't mean to kill." He adjusted the boy's grip, guiding his stance. There was no bravado, no excitement, just the sober understanding that in these mountains, knowing how to defend yourself could mean waking up tomorrow. When they were done, Eli leaned the rifle against the wall. The boy looked at it once more before returning to the cot. The girl shifted in her sleep, and he sat beside her, smoothing her hair. Eli watched them for a long moment. The image pulled something deep from him, a memory of sitting beside Lila after she'd fallen asleep on nights their father didn't come home, staring at the cracked ceiling and wondering if they'd see the morning without trouble. He reached up, absently rubbing the scar along his forearm. It was a pale line now, but he remembered the night it came, the shattered bottle, the shouting, the rush to get Lila out before the door splintered. The boy caught him looking, and after a moment, pointed to it. "What happened?" Eli met his eyes. "Someone tried to keep me where I didn't belong." The boy didn't smile, but his gaze softened, a small flicker of recognition, as if he understood more than any child should. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire burned steady. For the first time since he'd found them, Eli felt something almost like peace, fragile, temporary, but real enough to hold on to. The first sound was the crunch, snow under boots, slow, deliberate, and too heavy to be an animal. Eli's head snapped toward the window. The fire cast just enough light to see the faint outline of movement beyond the tree line, dark shapes shifting between trunks. He stood, grabbed the rifle from the wall, and looked at the boy. "Get her into the crawl space," he said, already moving toward the door. The boy hesitated. "Now," Eli growled, not in anger, but in urgency. The child obeyed, dragging his sister toward the loose plank near the hearth. Eli stepped outside, cold air burning his lungs. 3 men emerged from the shadows. The one in front was tall, his beard matted, eyes sharp in the half-light. A shotgun hung casually in his hands, but his grip said he was ready to use it. "Evening," the man drawled. "Got something of mine in there." Eli's fingers tightened on the rifle stock. "You lost something, you can go look in the nearest sheriff's office." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, ain't the law's concern. Those kids, they're mine. Blood don't run from blood." One of the others shifted, revealing a length of chain hanging from his belt. The sound of it rattling sent a flash of heat through Eli's chest. "Turn around," the man said. "Bring 'em out, and I'll let you keep your skin." Eli didn't move. Instead, he stepped forward into the moonlight, leveling the rifle at the man's chest. "You're not taking them." The smile dropped from the man's face. "You think you know what you're protecting? You don't know the half of it. Boy ain't even hers. We took him in after his mama sold him for a bottle." The words landed like a strike, but Eli didn't flinch. Truth or lie, it didn't matter. What mattered was the way the boy's arm had wrapped around that girl. That was family enough. "You've got till I count to 3, the man said, lifting the shotgun. 1. Eli felt the cold wood of the rifle against his cheek, the familiar weight settling into his shoulder. 2. Inside the cabin, the faint sound of the girl coughing reached his ears. It anchored him. 3. The world shrank to the moment between breaths. Eli fired first. The crack shattered the still night, sending crows exploding from the trees. The front man dropped to one knee, cursing, clutching his shoulder. The others surged forward. Eli swung, fired again. The second man stumbled, chain clattering to the ground. The third rushed him, tackling him into the snow. They hit hard, the rifle tumbling away. Fists landed. Eli felt the taste of blood in his mouth, the sting in his ribs, but he fought like a man who'd already decided how this night would end. With a grunt, he drove his elbow back, grabbed a fistful of the man's coat, and heaved him face first into the frozen dirt. The leader was back on his feet now, shotgun raised. Eli saw the muzzle flash and moved without thinking. The shot tore through his side as he shoved the cabin door shut with his other hand, locking it. Inside, the boy's wide eyes met his. Eli's voice was ragged but steady. "You keep her safe, no matter what." The pounding on the door began, and Eli turned back toward it, blood warm against the cold, ready to stand until he couldn't anymore. The pounding at the door stopped. For a moment there was only the wind and the faint hiss of the fire inside. Then came the sound of boots crunching through snow, moving away. A low voice muttered something Eli couldn't make out, followed by the clatter of a shotgun being cocked. Then silence again. Eli pressed his back to the door, rifle in one hand, the other clamped over his side. Warmth seeped between his fingers, dark against the cold. He waited. 1 minute. 2. Only the creak of the pines shifting in the wind. Finally, he unlatched the door and stepped outside. Moonlight spilled silver over the clearing. 2 bodies lay motionless in the snow, the chain still wrapped around one man's gloved hand. The leader was gone, his footprints trailing down into the dark valley. Eli's breath came in clouds. He scanned the tree line one last time before turning back inside. The boy was crouched beside the cot, holding his sister's hand. Her eyes were open now, glazed but alert. When she saw Eli, she whispered something he couldn't hear. The boy leaned close, then looked at Eli. She said thank you. Eli swallowed against the tightness in his throat. He sank into the chair by the fire, the rifle leaning against his leg. No one spoke for a long time. The flames crackled. The girl's breathing steadied. Outside, the snow began again, soft and slow, erasing the tracks in the clearing. At dawn, Eli packed what little they could carry: a jar of beans, dried meat, the rifle, blankets. He didn't know if the man would return with more. He wasn't going to find out. The walk was slow. His side burned with every step, but he kept the pace steady, the boy close behind, carrying his sister wrapped in the blanket. No one asked where they were going. The only answer was down the mountain, toward the kind of place where the trees thinned and strangers might not ask too many questions. Once they stopped to rest at a bend in the trail. The valley stretched below, pale with morning frost. The girl stirred in the boy's arms, and for the first time, Eli saw her smile. Small, tired, but real. Something in him loosened. Not relief, not victory, just the knowledge that for now, they were still breathing. They walked on until the sun was high enough to warm the tops of the pines. At the edge of the last ridge, Eli paused, looking back at the trail disappearing into shadow. Somewhere up there, blood was freezing into the snow. Somewhere, a man nursed his wound and his anger. But here, in the fragile light of morning, the mountains seemed far away. Eli turned, shifting the strap of his pack, and led them down into the valley. No words, no promises, just the quiet agreement in their steps that whatever came next, they'd face it together. 2 months later, the mountains were just a dark line on the horizon. Eli hadn't been back. He didn't plan to. They'd settled in a small town tucked against the river, where the nights smelled of wet earth and the mornings began with the sound of gulls. Eli found work repairing fishing boats, his hands steady with the kind of patience only years of solitude could teach. The boy went to the schoolhouse down the lane, always walking his sister there first before going inside. The girl, still fragile, had color in her cheeks now. She'd sit on the porch in the afternoons, braiding bits of string into patterns she never explained. They didn't talk much about the night in the mountains. Some things lived better in silence, but every now and then, Eli would catch the boy watching the road, eyes narrowing at strangers who passed too slow. The same instinct Eli carried. One evening, near the end of spring, Eli sat on the porch whittling a piece of cedar. The boy came to stand beside him, holding the old .22 rifle. "I cleaned it," he said quietly. Eli nodded, taking the weapon, checking the action out of habit. "You're getting good," Eli said. The boy didn't smile, but the way his shoulders eased told Eli enough. When the sun dipped low, the girl padded out onto the porch, a small square of cloth in her hand. She placed it in Eli's lap. a patchwork she'd sewn from scraps, uneven but careful. At the center, stitched in thread the color of the sky, was a single pine tree. Eli traced it with his thumb, feeling the rough pull of the thread. He didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. That night, after they'd gone to bed, Eli sat alone by the window. The moon laid a silver road across the river, and the wind carried the faint scent of cedar. For the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Up in the mountains, snow would be melting, rivers swelling, and somewhere, a man might still be looking for what he'd lost.